production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
New strategies for fighting crime in Memphis, tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Worth Morgan from the Memphis City Council, also chairs the Public Safety Committee. Thanks for being here again.
Thank you for having me.
Josh Spickler is Executive Director of Just City, which advocates for criminal justice reform. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks, Eric.
Bill Gibbons is President of the Memphis Shelby Crime Commission and former Shelby County District Attorney and former head of Tennessee Homeland Security. Thanks for being here again.
Glad to be here.
Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So I will start with you, Bill Gibbons. The Operation Safe Community has released its third five-year plan, going back to 2006. We're talking a little before the show. You've been involved one way or another, either as District Attorney, as head of Tennessee Homeland Security, now in your new role in all of them. What is the plan? I think the past plans are very data-driven. You know, what kind of results, crime overall since 2006, violent crime is down. But this year, currently, in the news, nationally and in Memphis, violent crime is up. The murder rate is up. In Memphis, we've crossed a horrible, very sad, very frustrating milestone and record number of murders. 2 weeks ago as this airs, I think. What is new in this plan from the old plans that will tackle crime and reduce crime, which is on so many people's minds right now?
Well, I think a number of things. First of all, this plan is even more focused than the two previous plans on violent crime in particular. We understand that that's the major concern of citizens in this community. It is also focused on getting citizens involved in this effort. It can't just be law enforcement, prosecutors alone. It's got to involve the entire community. So it's a very focused plan, really trying to drive down our violent crime rate and trying to get citizens more involved in that. It is also going to be even more data-driven than the previous plans. Through the Public Safety Institute at the University of Memphis, we're going to have a deep dive evaluation of every single part of this plan to figure out what's working and what's not, and if it's not working, why. So to that degree, it's really a living, breathing plan that we can tweak as we go forward. And it's also very ambitious. If you look at the goals we have under this plan, we're talking about trying to have a pretty dramatic reduction in our crime rate. But I think we can do it.
Yeah, and the number, we can talk about so many parts of this, but just the number of organizations that are involved that, to make this work are pretty striking and daunting. I mean, it's not just the police department, the sheriff's department, and the district attorney and the public defenders. I mean, that's just the beginning. I mean, some of the other groups that you want to engage in this, just give me some examples.
Oh, we have everything from the business community, the faith community, various nonprofits. We're trying to get neighborhood watch groups, for example, involved in really pushing this. So it's a very broad group of individuals that we're trying to get involved and have had involved. We had about 500 individuals involved in developing this plan on the front end. I'll also add that this is a plan that is not a crime commission plan. It is a community plan. And it is a plan, again, that we've had a lot of input on. And I will also say that the county mayor, the city mayor, the police director, the sheriff, the U.S. attorney, and the district attorney, who's actually chairing the initiative, have all signed off on this. So it's a plan that they have adopted as theirs as well.
Right. So, Josh, you've been on the show before. We've talked about, criminal justice. We've talked about crime in Memphis. We've talked about reforms that you all have advocated for. From, I'll do a poor job of. Give me some. Why don't I let you do a better job? Mm-hmm. Some of the things you all have advocated for the smallest of offenses to the biggest of offenses.
Right. Well, I mean, at Just City, we're really all about a smaller criminal justice system, one that's smarter, one that's fairer and more humane. And so, some of the things that we've looked to have been, crimes that maybe 40 years ago weren't a crime, and particularly I'm thinking of things like driver's license issues that really bog down our criminal justice system and keep us from these violent crime problems that we need to address with the criminal justice system. And so we have focused a lot of our work on things like that and on things like leaving the system once and for all. Once you have been sentenced and served that sentence and paid the costs that have been asked of you, and getting that off your record so that you can get back to work and get out of the criminal justice system once and for all. That's something that is very difficult to do in a lot of places, but particularly in Tennessee. So we've focused our work on that as well.
And so with this plan specifically, what is your take on it? What's your evaluation of the plan?
Well, I'm very encouraged by the reentry portion of the plan, the idea that if we can get people out of the criminal justice system and back into our communities safely and productively, then that can help drive down crime of all sorts, including violent crime. And so I'm really glad to see that in the plan. I think that has been missing from our community's discussion of criminal justice reform in the past. Sort of discouraged that we continue to look to increase the size of our police force. I think one of the things that we've shown doesn't work, not just in Memphis, but across the country. Folks have studied this. Folks know that, especially when you're policing violent crime, like we've seen tragically this year in Memphis, additional police officers are really not at the top of the list of things that can affect that. And so that's discouraging.
And the number of police officers in Memphis around 2,000, down from, I think it peaked at around 2,400. Mayor Strickland ran and has sat at this table and said to everyone he wants to get back to that 2,400. We'll bring you in. We had 3 of your colleagues worth on the show. I believe it was last week. We talked about a lot of things, but including this. There's some differences of opinion on the council about whether, just to pick up on that, is 2,400 the magic number? What strategies are best? Everyone agrees crime is a problem. I mean, there was no, I don't want to say that anyone said, oh, it's no big deal. But also there's just the matter of paying for it. It's expensive. The police are expensive. Some of these strategies are expensive. From your point of view, I don't think anyone on the council wants to raise taxes. The city has just gotten its fiscal house back in some semblance of order. How do you approach these? How do you look at these things when, again, you've got to take the votes to pay for them?
Right. So as of now, the police side of our budget is roughly about 41% of our general fund. So, I mean, it's by far the largest piece of the pie that we pay for in the city of Memphis. And I do think we have to increase the number of officers, strictly just from an overtime point of view right now in terms of what we're paying out. We can put more officers on the street or more officers into the police department right now. It won't necessarily increase the feeling on the street until we get to a higher number. We have 2,000 applications so far for our March class, and we're hoping to start with 200 in the academy. They'll have to go through psychological training, physical evaluations before they even enter the class, and then hopefully graduate 5.5 months later, 150 to 175. Right. And that's something that we just need to continually keep up, I think, for the next few years, doing 2 classes a year. So, I mean, there may be disagreement about, how we allocate police resources, but as of now, we need more police officers. That's the number one complaint.
The plan makes an interesting point about working the cops in overtime causes stress. I mean, it makes them thinner, makes them more stressed out. And so if you could get them down to a regular level of 40 hours or something like that, you would hopefully have better policing.
And as we talk about community policing, we don't want our officers out there strictly responding from call to call to call to call because they're shorthanded. There are community policing efforts. There are proactive efforts that can be made in these neighborhoods. In terms of searching, in terms of Blue Crush initiatives as well, going to hot spots that we want to have our officers available to answer that call.
We'll get Bill Dries in.
Josh, where are you on that issue of community policing, and can you do effective community policing with a police force of around 2,000 people?
Well, I should make clear that I'm not a policing expert. So when I say these things, and you make the point very, very well, that the efficient use of these officers is really what you're talking about when you talk about overtime and overtaxing our force as it exists. And so increasing the complement of officers to address personnel concerns is certainly a viable conversation that we should have. My response is that this plan and the mayor is calling for additional officers to address the problem of violent crime, to address the problem of homicide, and that's where I think we disagree, and I don't think that's a viable approach to that problem. In terms of community policing, I think obviously any time the officers that are tasked with this almost impossible job of intercepting violent crime and intercepting murders before they happen, when they know their neighborhoods, when they know the people on the front porches and at the businesses, of course it's better. Of course it's better. And I think we've proven that to be effective with some very good programs here in Memphis that do put those police officers in touch with the people they're policing. And I think that that is one reason that we haven't, luckily seen any major problems with our police and citizens in Memphis. While they exist, I think we've avoided a lot of them because there are those relationships, and I think we should continue down that road. The more officers that we can put out of their cars on foot in those communities, it feels like a great idea to me. Again, not an expert in policing, but I think the concept is viable.
So, Bill, how does this work? When you talk about bringing down violent crime and more police officers, is there room in that response for community policing? In other words, are we going to 2,400 in this plan just to battle violent crime, or with an eye toward community policing programs?
Well, community policing is also part of the plan. And when I talk about community policing, I'm talking about police and citizens working together to solve problems. It may be blighted property, it may be a series of burglaries or whatever, but the police and the community working together. So that's our concept of community policing. I will say that we firmly believe that there is a correlation between the number of police officers we can put on the street in a data-driven way, so we're putting them in the right places at the right times, and the crime rate. And I think the best example is going back a few years. Our very best year in our violent crime rate was 2011. We had about a 24% decrease in our violent crime rate in 2011 compared to 2006. 2011 was the year when we were over 2,400 police officers. We were close to 2,500, and we were deploying those police officers in a data-driven way, which is very important. You've got to be smart in how you use your police officers, but we were doing that very effectively. We had almost 2,500 officers, and it was having a tremendous impact. And it's worth pointing out, now we're down below 2,000 officers, and where we're having to rely on overtime to have the kind of coverage that we need. We're short in virtually every precinct, and paying overtime to officers is not the answer. It is simply increasing the stress level that officers face on a day-to-day basis. So the plan calls for an increase in police officers, and we think we need that.
Let's talk a little bit about 2011, because I think that was arguably probably the peak of the Blue Crush period.
Correct.
Where we saw a lot of raids on drug houses, a lot of boarding them up, and community policing at that point was really kind of in the background because Blue Crush was so aggressive. And there was talk in some of the neighborhoods that, okay, there's a big show when the drug houses are boarded up, but there is not a follow-through that is as visible in terms of building ties to the community with the police. So how do we know that we don't get another build-up to 2,400 and then there's no follow-through beyond kicking in doors and putting up the plywood with the stencils on it?
Well, that's why you've got to have both. You've got to have data-driven deployment of your officers to try to have an impact on the crime rate. But you've also got to have that follow-up. You can't just go into a particular area, deploy officers, reduce the crime rate, and then leave. You've got to also have an ongoing presence in working with the citizens. And what you're going to see in the next couple of weeks is, I think, some very significant announcements geared toward that and really improving the working relationship between police, prosecutors, and citizens in a number of areas of our city.
Yeah.
Worth, you wanted to say, and then we'll get to Josh.
Yeah, I'll just say building stronger relationships with the community and the police is a constant point of focus right now. And it's a discussion that we're having just about every week in City Hall, and not just in City Hall, but out in the communities. As I go, the police have just been absolutely terrific, I think. As I go to community events, a lot of times we're in neighborhood meetings where crime will happen, and they have an uptick in whether it be burglaries or something else, and the community really shows up for the meeting. The police are right there every time, and it's not on their it's not overtime pay. It's not on they're there on their own personal hours, meeting and talking with members of the community. And this is a job and a calling. They love what they do and they love being there. They've been absolutely terrific from what I've seen this year.
Josh, you want to respond?
Yeah.
I think as we talk about crime rates, we talk about 2011 being a great year and when we were really focused on Blue Crush, I think it's important to note that crime rates generally have continued to fall since 2016, while homicides...
Since 2011.
Since
fine.
2011
That's
to
fine.
2016. Homicides get the headlines, and there are a couple of other violent crime categories that have seen increases. But by and large, this community has enjoyed a decrease in crime rates since 2011.
Yeah. And Bill's nodding.
Well, that's a very important point
Right.
that Josh made out. Actually, if you look at the crime trends, really since 2006, we've had a continuing decline in our property crime rate and our overall crime rate. We have not had a continuing decline in our violent crime rate. So that's the big challenge.
And there's been a spike nationally. I mean, it's in the report and it's been recovered. I mean, Nashville has had a big spike in homicides. Chicago, LA, cities, Louisville, all over the country. And there's not enough time yet, it seems, for people to really analyze why that is. But the other thing that's in the report, and we've talked about this table, I think 40% of murders involve gang members, 17% above that. So as much as 60% are suspected to involve gang members. So talk about the emphasis on gang violence and what's been done right in the past. What needs to change?
Well, that's you're exactly right. I'm simplifying this some, but when you look at our violent crime rate in particular, it's being driven by gangs, guns, and drugs, and domestic violence.
Right.
Those are the four factors, and you can't really separate those four entirely. They kind of go together. But the new Operation Safe Community Plan does place major emphasis on reducing gang violence in particular. One example in the plan is the Group Violence Initiative, which is really based on a very successful program in the city of Boston. It was called Project Ceasefire in Boston. We're calling it Group Violence Initiative here.
Project Ceasefire is pretty serious.
But it's
some tough branding.
It's an example of the kind of thing we can do that can really have an impact on the violent crime rate.
Right.
And basically, and I'm simplifying this some
that's
because we
fine.
don't have a lot of time, but basically it's saying to those gang members who have made the bad decision to engage in violent behavior, we're going to come after you if you don't change your behavior. We're going to do everything we can to hold you accountable. But we're also going to provide you a different avenue if you want to change your lifestyle, if you want
Right.
to change your behavior, and try to give them that option.
The carrot and stick
And
approach.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Your take on gang violence, Josh? I mean, and that because it is a strange perception, and the media. I feel like we do a good job of it. Nationally, the media does a terrible job with crime. They create this impression that there's a murderer at every corner, and that every murder is tragic. I don't mean to downplay this, but it is very focused, as you said. I mean, statistically, on gang violence and drugs and drug dealing. And so if you're not involved in any of those three things, your chances of being involved in a murder went way down. But your take on the focus on gang violence and what needs to be done there.
Well, I think the approaches that we need to take to that are similar to the things that are going to work to reduce a homicide rate. And I think that those are long-term solutions. And I think that they involve less law enforcement and more opportunity. I mean, and Commissioner Gibbons mentioned that they're providing opportunities for these folks in a very targeted way when we're talking about gang violence. I think that, again, one thing that Jess City is interested in is providing jobs to people, or is making it easier to get jobs. And I think that is a crime-fighting tool that we don't really talk about as such many times, and that is a job.
Right.
When you have a job, you have hope and you have a reason not to engage in a lot of this behavior that we're talking about. And while this criminal justice system can work to provide opportunity and provide these carrots and sticks, it also, in many, many more ways, and much more effectively, quite frankly, keeps you from getting a job, keeps you from re-entering this community in a meaningful way. And if we can refocus this system to do that, to take down those barriers and keep that from happening, we're going to see reductions in gang violence and
Go ahead.
homicides.
You want to
So
comment?
when people enter the system, there are multiple goals in place. Over 97% of people that enter the prison system are going to exit at some point. There do need to be those goals and that chance for hope and reform in place. But at the same time, we also, another one of the goals is that we have a responsibility, and I think it's our number one responsibility for people to feel safe and people to be safe, and we have to make decisions based on justice and based on safety for the community in terms of making the right reforms and holding those who've committed themselves to a life of violent crime thus far, from what we've seen, in prison and in
But,
jail.
but you talk about violent crime, and we've talked a
Yeah.
lot at this table. We've talked with Josh and others, Harold Collins, who you work with, and former city councilman now involved with these programs. And in the plan, there's continued push for reform to juvenile offenders and getting. And I'm going to do a bad job, but getting juvenile offenders, instead of ending up in juvenile court because they were out past curfew or they were delinquent from school, very, very well. Anyone would say they shouldn't be doing that, but very minor offenses. Get them not to go into the juvenile court system and the juvenile jail, which statistically, once they do that, it just seems to introduce them to a life of further entry into the criminal justice system. Talk about some of the alternatives you all are pushing to getting people into the juvenile court system.
One very important part of the plan is to create what we call a juvenile assessment center. And that would be a physical facility with various services available. But once a juvenile commits that very first delinquent act, assess that juvenile's situation, or the things going on in that juvenile's life that we could impact to help move him or her in the right direction, or their family issues that can be addressed. But try to do that assessment after that very first act occurs, so that juvenile is less likely to become a repeat offender.
So they're not booked and put through
That's
the
correct.
system.
Under this concept, they would be taken to this juvenile assessment center rather than juvenile court.
Yeah.
That juvenile's needs assessed and trying to address the problem on the front
Okay,
end.
5 minutes left. Your take on that, and I'll go back to Bill Dries. Your take on those sorts of reforms?
Well, I mean, I think obviously anytime we're not taking them down to juvenile court, that's great. I mean, ultimately, much like community policing and community prosecuting, which is also in here, we're talking about a relationship that is based on bringing to bear the power of the government, the power of the police, the power of the court system into an individual's life. And Juvenile Assessment Center sounds nice, but it is essentially still, an arm of the government moving in.
But then what do you do? I'll let you finish.
No, it's
Sorry.
fine.
What do you do then? I mean, a kid is out past curfew, or he's delinquent from school. I mean, there has to be some response.
Of course, and I think that much of that does rest in the community in this instance. I think we get distracted sometimes when we talk about these small slivers of the problem, and effectively the juvenile justice system that deals with these children is a very tiny part, and we have moms, dads, and we have a much broader swath. Half a dozen criminal courts in the general sessions are dealing mostly with driving on suspended charges. And I hate to keep coming back to that because it's not a violent crime and it doesn't make people afraid, but it is a huge drag on our community in that these moms and dads can't get to work. They can't get jobs. And that's what the criminal justice system is doing in a much bigger way than it's dealing with kids.
Again, with just a couple minutes left, and I'll go to Bill Dries. You've got, Amy Weirich saying there are 160,000, the current DA, 160,000 cases through the courts. She wants 30 new prosecutors. But a lot of that, and Harold Collins has talked about it, you've talked about it, Reverend Norman, Keith Norman's on talking about it, that it is these small fines, small fee stuff that I don't think anyone would say is violent, but that the courts are bogged down with. And there are big criticisms of how, again, free the courts up to focus on.
And it's a jail that's not working properly. And it's all of those things that are a huge part of this problem.
Okay. Bill.
So, Bill, is there room here to review these fines? Do these fines have to be in place? And how much of the fines are punishment, and how much of the fines are paying for the system?
Well, you and I have talked about this in the past, and what the General Assembly has done over many years is if they see a problem, the solution is to revoke a driver's license and to impose a fine. So over the years, it's just grown and grown and grown. And I agree with Josh that it's something we need to look at. As Commissioner of Safety and Homeland Security, it's something we dealt with because we handled our driver license system. Here's the issue. If you're going to take the whole issue of revoked licenses, suspended licenses out of the criminal justice system and set up an administrative law system, that means you've got to have administrative law judges to handle that, to handle those matters, and there's a fiscal impact on that. So that's been the roadblock in the past in terms of setting up a separate system to handle driver license issues. Governor Bredesen looked at it, and the fiscal impact was something that really just kind of blocked it. But I think it's worth looking at. It is a huge part of the caseload at 201 Poplar, and if we could create some alternative to that, I think it'd be good. One very good thing that has happened, and I'm sure Josh is familiar with this, about a year ago, the Department of Safety and Homeland Security did institute a new arrangement under which every inmate leaving state prison will either be issued a driver license if he or she is eligible for a driver license or a state ID. That's important because prior to that, inmates were leaving prison without any official government ID. What are your chances of getting a job if you don't even have a government ID? So that's one problem we've been able to address.
Just a minute. I mean, it's interesting in the report, you know, of the 12,000 people I'm reading from right now entering state prison last year, 5,000, 40% were probationers or parolees sent back to prison because they violated supervision conditions.
That's correct.
And the plan wants the General Assembly passed a law, and you'd like to see things change so the recidivism and the parole violations go down. It's very expensive, and again, you're not getting a job if you're going back to jail. I mean, put it, you know,
that's correct.
lightly.
And as of January 1st, we are kicking off a new system in the state of Tennessee so that more of those, what you might call technical violations of probation and parole, are not handled by sending someone back into the system, but handled administratively. And I think that can make a big difference.
Your take on that? I mean, just like 30 seconds left. I mean, that's the direction you've been advocating for,
Yeah,
right?
it was one of the bright lights or you know, good spots last year in the legislative session. And I agree. We keep people from going back. I mean, we spend $1 billion in Tennessee on our Department of Correction, and so this is designed to limit that, and it does.
I was going to ask Worth a question that wasn't fair, and it would not give him anywhere near enough time to answer, and I was going to cut you off, and so I won't do it. I'll just thank you for being here. Bill Gibbons, thank you for being here again. Josh, Bill, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.